Pastor Ed here, back with daily devotions. This today for Tuesday, December the 27th. Going to go back to our gospel reading on Christmas Eve, Luke 2, 1 through 7. In those days, a decree went out from Emperor Augustus that all the world should be registered. This was the first registration and was taken while Quirinius was governor of Syria. All went to their own towns to be registered. Joseph also went from the town of Nazareth in Galilee to Judea to the city of David called Bethlehem, because he was descended from the house and family of David. He went to be registered with Mary, to whom he was engaged and who was expecting a child. And while they were there, the time came for her to deliver her child. And she gave birth to her firstborn son and wrapped him in bands of cloth and laid him in a manger, because there was no place for them in the inn. A pastor by the name of Jim Kane describes that first Christmas in a way that we probably normally think about it as well. He writes, let's think about it for a moment. What if every man in this country had to go back to his hometown and register himself and his household in person for the next U.S. Census? What would the roads and the rail lines and the skies of this country look like? Get the picture? It was a madhouse that night, he says. People were everywhere, all looking for the same thing, a place to stay, but there was no room at the inn. Have you ever seen pictures of the streets of ancient Israelite cities? They make our streets here in this country look like boulevards. They're narrow, they're crooked, they're crowded. People, animals, merchandise are stuffed into them, much like, dare I say it, parking lots, malls, and shopping centers. In the midst of this chaotic mess is an innkeeper who has done battle with numerous Bethlehem natives, all trying to get in, get registered, and get out in a day or two. And just about the time the things seem to slow down, Mary and Joseph arrive. There's no room. She looks miserable. He looks scared. No family around to take them in. The innkeeper knows the question is coming. Have you any room for us? And he knows the answer that's coming out of his mouth for the 100th time. But this time, the innkeeper, it seems, finds them room in the livestock shelter of his inn. Again, that's pretty much the way we normally think about it. But we're going to look at it in a slightly different way this week, beginning today with the first couple of verses, and with the fact that the decree went out from Emperor Augustus that all the world should be registered. This was the first registration was taken while Quirinius was the governor of Syria. There's some question, there doesn't seem to be a historical record of such a census, although there were censuses taken by the Roman government at various times, but never necessarily an all-encompassing one, at least that we can find record of. The interesting thing, though, is this decree that Luke refers to. Some translations refer to this as a census, and apparently it was done for tax purposes. So if I'm not mistaken, in our country, we do a census every 10 years, more for representation purposes in Congress and so forth. This was done apparently, and the censuses that we do know that took place and the registrations were done for tax purposes. But there's this problem with the timeline. Luke tells us that this so-called first registration occurred when Quirinius was the governor of Syria. Well, unfortunately, the historical record shows that Quirinius didn't actually become governor until about 10 or so years after Jesus' birth. So we know from Matthew's gospel and the whole thing with Herod and the Magi, which we're going to get into this coming Sunday, Herod died in about 4 BCE, before the Common Era. Quirinius doesn't become governor until 6 CE, or the Common Era. So there's 10 years. There's a 10-year gap there. Although it can be possibly explained by the fact that Luke does call this the first registration. New Testament scholar Frederick Danker, Lutheran scholar, suggests Luke may very well be describing just the first stage, the enrollment of inhabitants for the purpose of determining tax liability. The collection of the taxes would actually take place later, but in the Roman Empire of those days, this would be a long, drawn-out process. The interesting thing is that the Greek word translated here as census or registration is apographo, which literally means to write your name, and refers to entering into the public record the names of men as well as their property and their income. And again, you could see how this might be helpful and useful for tax purposes. Closest thing that I can think of that we still do today is how we have to fill out and then sign our names and file a tax return every year. And of course, more often than not, at least in my case, pay any taxes that we still owe. All right, so far so good. There's a registration. Joseph's going to have to register, sign in, so to speak. But it doesn't quite unfold the way we normally think about it. We're going to come back to that, pick up the story tomorrow, and see that, offer you a different way of looking at it. But clearly, Mary and Joseph are going to travel to Bethlehem, but not necessarily for the reasons that we normally think. I'll keep you in suspense a little bit, and we'll pick the story up tomorrow. Until then, take care. Bye.